Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and coming into this NBA season as a Brooklyn Nets fan myself, I didn't really know what to expect out of this team. I knew that we had some good young players. I knew that we had a smart front office and a smart coaching staff, which I'm going to talk about later on in this video, but I didn't really know how far along we were in trying to rebuild from what is arguably, and most would consider to be, the worst trade in NBA history. And in that 5+ year span since that 2013 trade, it's been a roller coaster as a Brooklyn Nets fan. From a team that looked like it might be pushing for championship contention, to being one of the most hopeless teams in NBA history, to now finally having some promise for the future. And the interesting thing is, now the narrative is kind of changed from a team that made one of, if not the worst trades in NBA history, to an unlikely rebuilding success story that continues to grow in popularity with each passing game this season. And so along with that narrative, I felt like it was important to look back at how exactly the Nets got here and kind of the unconventional way they've been able to rebuild themselves without basically any of their own draft picks into a team that could be seen as an intriguing free agency destination in the summers of 2019 and 2020. We begin, of course, back on the night of the 2013 NBA draft, which is really where this story begins for the Brooklyn Nets. The team was coming off of a 49-win season in their first in Brooklyn and in the brand new Barclays Center, and were led by Deron Williams, Joe Johnson, and Brook Lopez. And although that doesn't sound like a great core by today's NBA super team standards, that's a nice trio to build around, and that's exactly what the Nets were looking to do, to build off of that 49-win season and potentially try and push towards an NBA championship, which was a very public and stated goal of relatively new owner Mikhail Prokhorov. And on draft night in 2013, the Nets made a trade that they thought was going to put them over the top in trading with the Boston Celtics for Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry, among other assets. Now, what that trade ended up meaning is something that we're going to get into down the road, but essentially the team did not have their own first-round pick in 2014, 2016, 2017, or 2018, but even when the trade was made, it was not universally hated on the way that it is now. Most people thought that those picks would be later on in the first round, and the Celtics really weren't going to get a ton of value, and famously Bill Simmons even said that this trade was 35 cents on the dollar for the Celtics during ESPN's draft night coverage. And I know it might seem strange to think about now, but at the time the Nets were seen as one of the top 5 teams in the league in the preseason, and potentially a team that could push for an NBA championship or a finals run. The problem was things went downhill almost immediately, as they won 44 games the first year after the trade, then 39 games the next, and by the 2015-16 season, everything had completely fallen apart, and they won just 21 games with a roster consisting of past their prime players, and quite frankly, a team half filled with players that shouldn't have even been on an NBA roster. And this is the part of the story where the Nets start to become, as I said, one of the most hopeless franchises in NBA history, because we as fans knew the team wasn't any good. We're winning 20-something games, but also there's no lottery pick. There's no high pick to try and save us moving forward, and there was just nowhere for us to go as a team, and the only word to describe it was just absolutely hopeless. And to me personally, I don't think that kind of hopeless feeling is something that any other NBA fan base has ever felt, unless you want to go all the way back to the Cleveland Cavaliers days when Ted Stepien was just giving away first-round picks. Speaking of those picks, it is now time to go back to the terms of the original deal. The 2014 pick was actually not that big of a deal to the Nets because they were fairly good that season, and that ended up being James Young, but the 2016, 17, and 18 pick swap ended up becoming Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Colin Sexton. So it's pretty easy to follow the thread here. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are key parts of the Celtics rotation and are 2 up-and-coming young players, and Colin Sexton was a piece used in the Kyrie Irving trade. And so just take yourself back now to 2016. Imagine being in my shoes or any other Nets fan shoes back then. We just came off of an awful GM and an awful couple of head coaches. We have aging players at the top that aren't very good anymore, very little young talent, very little salary cap flexibility, and no assets to try and make any moves and none of our own first-round picks. So at the time, I'm thinking, where do we go from here? We can't be bad because tanking doesn't help if you don't have your own pick, and being good isn't really an option either because we don't have very many good players. So what the heck are we supposed to do? Well, thankfully for me and other Nets fans, 2016 was right around the time when things began to turn around, and you can point to a couple of key specific moves from then to now that have started to build this young core and make them an intriguing free agency option. And just like most rebuilds, the catalyst of the turnaround was simply hiring the right people in the correct positions. First, a new GM was hired in Sean Marks in February of 2016, replacing Billy King, the man that is probably the worst GM in NBA history and the architect of that 2013 trade with the Celtics. And then to start the 2016-17 season, the team hired Kenny Atkinson as their new head coach. And I do think it's important to point out here that I have literally no idea why Sean Marks or Kenny Atkinson took these positions, because I'm sure there were plenty of people telling them that it was an awful idea. The ownership did not look to be in great shape at the time, and the roster was pretty awful, and I've already talked about how hopeless the situation was. But now that they've been hired, Marks and Atkinson had the task of trying to rebuild a team with little to no young talent and none of their own first-round picks, and this is how they went about it. Starting off in the 2016 draft, they traded Thaddeus Young to the Pacers for their first-round pick, which ended up being 20th overall, and selected Michigan combo guard Caris Levert. Funnily enough, the team only had Thaddeus Young because they traded Kevin Garnett to the Timberwolves for him, and obviously Garnett was a part of that original Celtics deal. Next up, obviously the team was not a big free agency destination, so they had to start looking on the scrap heap of NBA teams to try and find some good rotation players. The first was in December of 2016 with Spencer Dinwiddie. He was drafted by the Pistons and had some injury issues there, was traded to the Bulls, waived, and then picked up by the Nets and got consistent NBA minutes for the first time in his career. The other was in July of 2016 when they signed Joe Harris, who had been waived by both the Cavs and Magic, but has since become a very good three-point shooter for the Nets. Next up, the search for any kind of young promising talent continued, and the team traded for D'Angelo Russell from the Lakers in exchange for Brook Lopez and, yes, the pick that became Kyle Kuzma. D'Lo was on the outs in LA for a number of reasons, but the team saw an opportunity to buy low on him and brought him in to provide some young talent. In 2017, with a Wizards pick that they received via a midseason deal, they drafted center Jarrett Allen. And in the 2018 draft, they picked two international prospects with picks that they received from a DeMarre Carroll salary dump in both the first and second round. You guys know I struggle with pronunciation, so I'm just going to refer to them by their last name from here on out. Kurucs was picked in the second round of the 2018 draft and was kind of passed on after some weird situations with his international team, but has been the catalyst for a really nice recent stretch of play by the Nets and looks to be one of the most promising young players on their roster. While Musa was picked with the first round pick that they received in that Raptors trade and has had to deal with some injury issues, but when he's been healthy has been an absolute monster in the G League. And now here we are in 2019, over 5 years after that trade that seemingly doomed the franchise, and the Nets have recovered very, very quickly once again without any of their own picks. They traded away some veterans to get picks out of other teams. They tried their best to find any kind of talent they could off the NBA scrap heap, and have done a great job of developing players and prioritizing their own style of play. And keep in mind that these weren't exactly obvious decisions to make. The highest draft pick that they had throughout this time period of any of these 7 players was 20th, and that was Caris Levert. Everybody else was drafted after that or signed, like I said, off the NBA scrap heap. The exception here is obviously D'Angelo Russell, but they bought low on him because of some weird situations in LA, and they really made a great deal out of that. And now moving forward, of course, now that the Nets own their own first round pick this year, they're actually trending up, and as of this video would be in the NBA's Eastern Conference playoffs, but that's completely fine with me because it means that we're at least progressing and not just continuing to tank. And this is the first time since 2013 that the Nets have access to their own first round pick, and they also have access to the Denver Nuggets top 12 protected first round pick for this year because they took on Kenneth Faried's salary this past offseason, and they have the New York Knicks unprotected second round pick this year, which if you're following the Knicks season, they are not very good, and that second round pick could end up being very high in the second round and basically the equivalent of a late first round pick. And to be completely honest, this is not a video that I really anticipated making so soon, but a lot of these guys have really made a leap, and once Levert comes back from his injury, which could be this season or next, I'm not sure, this is a team that's going to continue to be good moving forward, and I trust in this front office and this coaching staff to continue to make the right decisions moving forward. And I just think it's interesting to look back on where the team was just a couple of years ago and where their draft capital and their young talent base was compared to some other teams around the league back then, and now how much better shape they're in than some of those other teams that even have had high lottery picks when they haven't. And through all of those tiny little moves and little bit of maneuvers and hiring the right guys, they've been able to recover very well and very quickly from what many consider to be the worst trade in NBA history. And that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.